Assalamualaikum everyone. So in the previous presentation or the recorded lecture, we were discussing about what is research, the different methods, the parts of the research. But in this presentation, I'd like to reiterate, I'd like to add more in detail about the different parts of a thesis, because this is really a requirement. So at the end of the semester, you have to submit a proposal, a title proposal. That's why it would be good to review once again about the parts of the thesis. So you know very well, and you have a lot of idea, all of us are professionals, of what is a thesis. So as a review, this is a proposition stated and put forward for consideration, especially one to be discussed and proved or to be maintained against objections. He vigorously defended his thesis on the causes of war. So that's an example. Then this is a subject of composition or essay. That's also a thesis. Then a dissertation, when we will proceed to your, after finishing the master's degree, dissertation, a particular subject in which one has done original research as one presented by a candidate or for a diploma or a degree. So meaning you research, there are a lot of related studies. So maybe what you are in mind now in your title presentation, it's not a duplication, pero masasabi natin baka mayroon ng kapareho. Okay? So what about the parts of a thesis? So in the initial pages, take note on this. I think in your undergraduate, all of us, all of you, you experience to write a thesis. You have the title page, approval sheet, the abstract, acknowledgement, dedication, the table of contents, the list of tables, and the list of figures. So what about the title page? So the following information needs to be on the title page. Of course, the title and possibly the subtitle of your thesis, then the first name and your surname as a researcher or an author, then whether it is a bachelor, a master, or even a dissertation, then do not forget the faculty and the department, then the place and date of completion. So yun yung mga nilalaman ng title page. What about the approval sheet? This is to prove that the writer or the authors have passed the requirements needed for the thesis. So this is a sign of a thesis, or maybe a feasibility study advisor, then a panel and the dean. So may signature yon. Then this also states the grade obtained by the authors. Usually in our university, ang nakalagay lang pass or failed. Pass or failed. But when I took up my master's degree in the university, Notre Dame University, meron kaming grading system, kagaya sa undergrad, summa cum laude, at saka magna cum laude. Noon, during that time, may ibang mga term ginagamit. Meritus, which is equivalent to cum laude, and benemeritus, the magna cum laude, and meritissimus, yun yung parang summa cum laude. Pero ngayon, in our university, pass or fail lang. So yun yung grade. Then the abstract. An abstract presents a brief summary of your thesis. The aim of the abstract is to briefly provide the reader with the most important information from the entire text. Kung makapal yun, wag nang kapalan pa sa abstract. I think the abstract, 250 to 300 words, that's enough. Then, an abstract never contain new information kasi nandoon, parang kopyahin lang, pinaiksi mo lang. And a summary is no longer than 2 pages if you use the A4. O kahit na yung short bond paper, basta more or less 250 to 300 words ang abstract. Then the acknowledgement. This is a page focused on expressing gratitude to your organization, the agencies, or individuals who, in one way or another, have aided or have helped the researcher in finishing the thesis. So that's more on acknowledgement. Then, of course, the dedication. This is the page for dedicating the thesis to certain people, maybe your family, your loved ones, or the groups who have inspired the researcher while doing your thesis. Then, of course, the table of contents is essentially a topic or the outline of the thesis. It is compiled by listing the headings in the thesis down to whichever level you choose. I think familiar naman tayo dyan kung anong nakalagay sa table of contents. Then, the list of tables. Kung may mga table, especially if you're using the quantitative method, may daming tables yan. So, nakasulat din yan doon. Includes the list of figures, the illustrations, kasali yung mga theory, or theoretical framework, the conceptual framework, kasi that's part. Then, the list of tables if you have one or more items in these categories. Use a separate page for each list kung ang dami. Then, list the number, the caption, the page number of every figure and table in the body of the thesis. Then, the title of chapters. The problem and its background, yun yung nakapaloob. Then, the RRL, or the review of related literature and studies. The methodology na ginamit mo. Then, the presentation, analysis, and interpretation. Then, summary, conclusion, and recommendation. So, that's the title of every chapter. Then, in chapter 1, of course, the background of the study, the introduction, and the background studies, yun yung nakapaloob doon. How many pages? 2? More than 2, but wag nang pahabain. Kasi that's only an introduction. So the first chapter of your thesis is your introduction, and this is where you provide an introduction to the topic of your thesis and give a context in the terms of content and the research paper or project. Then after that introduction, you have the significance of study that will mainly focus on the question, who will benefit the study? Remember, the significance of the study with the question, focus on the question, who will benefit on the study? Maybe to the LGU, to your institution, or to the students, and the rest. Then this section will also state the contribution of your study and the usefulness of your study in the society. So that's more on the significance of the study. Then the statement of the problem. The problem must be reflected on your title, or the readers must know your problem by just simply reading your topic. The problem must not be answerable by yes or no, and must be arranged in the flow of your documentation or study. So tandaan ninyo yan, ha. Your problem or your statement of the problem must not be answerable by yes or no. Like, who is the title, who is the author of your book? Yan, mga answerable, even yes or no, yung diretsahan. Then, kung tatanungin ninyo, ilan bang mga statement of the problem? Some are 3, some are 5, some are 7. Kaya nga, depende yan sa problem mo. Okay? Yung statement of the problem din. Depende sa title mo. Then, another one is your conceptual framework. So a conceptual framework elaborates the research problem in relation to a relevant literature. This section may summarize the major or the dependent or independent variables in your research, especially if you are using the quantitative method. Then the framework may be summarized in a schematic diagram that presents the major variables under hypothesized relationship. It should also cover the following: existing research and its relevance for your topic. Yes, may mga previous studies na related to your study. Then the key ideas or construct of your approach. Then identify and discuss the variables related to the problem. Then conceptualize the relationship between variables, the independent variables, the presumed cost, and the dependent variable, the presumed effect. So that's more on the cause and effect when we talk about independent as well as dependent variables. But well, in your statistic, this will be explained by your professor in detail if you have some query about the dependent as well as the independent variables. Then the intervening variables or other variables that influence the effect of the dependent and of the independent variable. So that's more on the conceptual framework. Then if you will ask, sir, what about theoretical framework? Theoretical framework, it's also very useful. You can also add that one, the theoretical framework, if your study is more on qualitative. So there are a lot of theories. Okay? So like this one, look at this schematic diagram. The profile of the respondents, like usually the indicator, the age, the gender, status, the educational attainment, the service, years of service, then what's the connection to the instructional materials and equipment, common cost of teaching science, especially if your study is more on the effect of the use of instructional materials and the equipment. Okay, that's more on the dependent as well as the independent variables. So once again, if you will be using the quantitative method, so mayroon talaga yung dependent as well as independent variables. Then another is scope and limitation, that some they write it delimitation. The scope is mainly the coverage of your study, and the limitation is the limitation of your study or topic. That's why some they wrote it scope and limitation, some they write scope and limitation. Okay, so nakadagdag yan doon sa research ninyo. Then of course the definition of terms must be arranged in alphabetical order. Then it must be stated if you use your definition in terms of technically or operationally. So you have to define the term according to its usage in your research. Okay? Then of course, chapter 2. So yun yung content ng chapter 1. Okay? Then chapter 2, anong content ng chapter 2? And of course, you know very well, that's the RRL or the review of related literature and studies. So ibig sabihin, there are already documents. Just copy the documents, but do not forget to write or to cite the authors, kasi para hindi tayo ma-plagiarize. Okay? So ano yung nakapaloob? This part, you must get your data and information from any books, the magazines, and newspapers. You must label your published materials with local or foreign. Usually, even in your introduction as well as in the related literature, it should start, of course, parang yung inverted pyramid. So if there are studies in the international, so unahin yung international, then to national, then local. So think of the inverted pyramid. So international, when in foreign studies, then to the national, kaya nga paliit ng paliit, then to the local. So usually yun yung mga nangyayari sa RRL. Huwag ka mag-umpisa noon sa local. Sir, wala man akong mahanap tayo international, o baka ikaw nauna, so wala tayong magawa dyan. So you have to start from scratch, start from the local. Wala namang problema. Then must be also organized to cover the specific problems and must take all the evidences about the problem with the author's experiences. Then, as much as possible, get the latest published materials and avoid old published materials. Usually, in our studies, mga 5 years, 10 years, pwede pa mapatawad, but dapat mga 5 years kasi mga recent studies dapat. Wag na yung 19 kopong-kopong. Sir, wala ako mahanap talaga. Pag wala kang mahanap, walang problema, pero usually, you'll be questioned by the panelists kung i-defend mo yon. Kung ako yung one of your panelists, i-question talaga, bakit 1960 pa ito? Wala ba talagang study na mga 2000? So, yon ha, tandaan natin yon. Then, it must be related to your topic, of course. If not, do not get it. So, that Sentido Común would tell you, why get those literature na hindi naman related sa topic mo. Then, on the last part of this part, you must have statement how these old published materials help the researcher in their current studies and relate it to your study. Okay? So, next. The other related studies, this part, you must get your data and information about the unpublished materials such as the previous old study, researches, thesis. In some format, you must level your unpublished materials with your local and foreign researches. So that's more on the related studies. Then this should be organized to cover the specific problems. Then you take note that all the events the previous research came up. Then the unpublished materials should not be older than 5 years if possible. So yun sabi ko sa inyo. Then it must be related to your topic. Then on the last part, which is really same is true with the RRL. Then in chapter 3, so this is more on methodology or the methods you use in your research. Then what about the methods used in your research? First, under methodology is the research design. The appropriate design should be specified and described. So, what research design will you use? Correlation, descriptive correlation, descriptive studies. So, it's up to you. Then the population and samples, if you'll be using also the quantitative research, describe the population and interest of the sampling of the subject used in your study. Then the research instrument. So describe the instrument that will be measured. Then state the qualifications of informants if used in your study. So, ano yung mga research instrument? But well, I told you it will be explained in detail by your statistic teacher. Okay? Then the validation procedure, discuss how the validity of unreliability will be established, specify the level of reliability or probability. So tuturuan din kayo dyan sa, and I think may template na about the validation procedure. May template na tayo dyan. Then ituturo din sa statistic teacher ninyo. Then in the gathering procedure, describe how instrument will be administered. Okay? Usually, questions, survey questionnaire. So, yun yung isa. Then, i-describe mo kung paano, kailan, o sino-sino yung mga respondent mo. Then, the data processing procedure and statistical treatment of the data, you have to describe the processing and the treatment of the data. Then, in the chapter 4, we have the presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data. So, ano yung nakapaloob sa chapter 4? Of course, in the presentation of data, present the findings of the study in order of the specific problem as stated in the statement of the problem, and present in a tabular form, textual, or graphical. Graphical is optional. Bakit optional? Kasi hindi pa tayo nasanay dito sa ating institusyon. Graphical, this is good. Kasi maganda, like pie graph, ang ganda, no? The bar graph, pictograph. Pero dito tayo, the usual is tabular tayo or textual. So ito yung ginagamit. Okay, that's in the presentation of your data. Then the analysis of data may be analyzed quantitatively or qualitatively depending on the level of measurement and the number of dimensions and variables of the study. So it can be quantitatively or qualitatively. Pwede ma-measure yan. Usually sa qualitative, ginamit mga thematic, okay? Inaayos yun, linagyan mga theme kung ano yung mga sinasabi para ma-analyze yung mga variables na yon. Then analyze in depth to give meaning to the data presented. In the data presented, the table. Then avoid table reading. Then state statistical description in the declarative sentence. So declarative sentence in the studies involving. Then establish interconnection between and among the data. Then check the indicators whether hypotheses are supported or not by findings. Then link the present findings with the previous literature. So take note on this link. That's why in your interpretation, you have your finding, then you cite, you have to link according to Mr. Ganito, according to Dr. Alferez in his study, which is related to your study, so it would be good to link. Okay? Then use parallel observations with contemporary events to give credence presented in the introduction. Then in the chapter 5, this is the summary of findings, the conclusions, and recommendations. What about the summary of findings? This describes the problem, the research design, and the findings, answer to the questions raised, the recommended format in the paragraph form instead of enumerated form. Pero usually yon, parang yung the statement of problem, parang binabalik na dito sa the summary of findings, then yun yung resulta. Then for each problem, present the salient findings, then the result and hypothesis tested. So doon yon, the summary. Then the conclusion. So these are brief generalized statements in answer to the general and each of the specific sub-problems. Then this contain generalized in relation to the population. These are general inferences applicable to a wider and similar population. Then flexibility is considered in making of conclusions. It is not a must to be stated conclusions on a one-on-one correspondence with the problem and the findings, as all variables can be subsumed in all paragraph. Take note on that. Then conclusions, we use the generalizations from the micro to the macro level and vice versa. Then in your recommendation, they should be based on the findings and conclusion of the study. Alangan naman. Then, recommendations must be specific or general or both. They may include suggestions for further studies. Okay? Then, they should be a non-technical language. Okay? Non-technical language. Bakit? Para maintindihan talaga. Then, they should be feasible, workable, flexible, doable, and adaptable, especially on the recommendation of further studies. Then, of course, the references. So, take note on the references. In doing the references, it should be yung the alphabetical, then order siya, the name, the family name, the book published, then the date, the publisher. So yun, usually it should be in alphabetical. Then if you are using only the website, you have to write the bibliography. So doon yung lahat nakaseparate. Then mga unpublished material, i-separate mo din yan. Then if you have journals, i-separate mo yung journals. Okay, so that's in the reference. Kung may mga journals at saka yung mga unpublished thesis, sulatin, but it should be in an alphabetical order. So with that, I hope you are being refreshed by this, especially the parts of your thesis. But by the way, in your title presentation, this is the traditional parts of the thesis, from title page to chapter 5. But nowadays, in our university, we are using IMRAD. So, hindi naman nagbabago ang parts, pero parang may variation lang. So, IMRAD. The IMRAD is, you have the introduction, at kasali na doon yung chapter 2, yung RRL, the review of the related literature. Kaya nga, IMRAD. So, introduction, then method agad. Then, RAD is result, then analysis, discussion. So, parang chapter 2, ipinasok na lang doon sa chapter 1, yung RRL. Okay, that's why in your title proposal, you have to make, of course, introduction, and of course, with that, kung ano yung nakapaloob sa introduction, sulat ninyo yun, the background of the study, especially the background study, then of course, nandoon yung statement of the problem, then ipasok na doon yung literature, yung RRL natin. Then, title presentation pa man yun, hindi masyadong madami. Siguro 1 to 2 or 3 pages na RRL, ibig sabihin related to your study. Then, of course, the methods, hanggang dyan lang ang title presentation ninyo. Then, i-defend ninyo yon, yung title presentation, before the end of the, at the end of the semester, ipapatawag kayo, i-defend ninyo yun. Then, whatever is the title approved by the panel, yun na yung title mo na dala-dala in your thesis. Kung may pagbabago man, bibigyan kayo ng advisor, usap lang kayo sa advisor, wala namang problema. Kasi yun yung title. Kasi before, after you finish the academic requirement, saka na magta-title defense. Pero ngayon, binago siya. In your research, dapat may title na mag-defend na sapagkat parang may ano na ba, dala-dala ka na, may wala nang rason na hindi ka makapag thesis kasi may approved title ka na. So ang gawin mo sa approved title, nandoon namang introduction, nandoon yung RRL, nandoon yung methods. So after your comprehensive examination, so meron na tayong proposal, and that proposal yon, i-enhance na lang yung title. And of course, the methods is dagdag na yung mga survey questionnaire ninyo. So, yun na yung mangyayari sa ating research subject. So, once again, that will be your final requirements is to have titles. Ang ipe-prepare is 3 titles. I-prepare ninyo. Of course, kompleto yon, yung introduction, then RRL, then yung methods. Then, yun yung isasubmit nyo sa office ko. Then, right after that, schedule natin for your title defense. So, with that, I hope you learned something. God bless everyone. Mabuhay, dalaygon ang Diyos. This is your friend, your professor, Brother JoArs Alferez, OCDS.